The taxi screeched to a halt just shy of the gravel driveway. I hadn't noticed in more than a year. I stepped out, boots still gritty with Afghan dust. My uniform crisp, looking forward to surprising my mom with an early homecoming and falling into my own bed for the first time in 11 months. But where my snug white cottage with green shutters and a porch swing once loomed, there was a dog park, a fenced-in barking madness of a dog park. 2 Labradors pursued a tennis ball through what had once been my living room. A woman in spandex glared at me with a dirty stare as she yanked her spaniel away from my duffel bag. I'd thought I'd mistaken the address until I spotted it. Oak tree I'd etched my initials into prior to deploying it. Scarred trunk stood proudly in what was still my yard, except my yard. No longer existed a sign that read Cedar Grove, Community Park sponsored by the Homeowners Association. A plaque beneath it raved about harmony and mutual joy. My heart pounded louder than mortar fire when I questioned a jogger. What became of the house? He shrugged and mentioned some deadbeat hadn't paid taxes, so HOA took the land back. He jogged off unaware that I was the so-called deadbeat. Something in me shattered not anger, not sorrow, but a bone-deep disbelief, laced with exhaustion. I'd survived ambushes, led night patrols, and rescued kids from burning huts. But here the enemy sported athleisure and clipboards. I spent hours ping-ponging between city offices, each clerk more clueless than the last property records asserted I'd lost my land 6 months ago for tax delinquency, except I'd filed a military tax exemption prior to one clerk barely glancing up, instructed me to speak to the HOA's president, Susan Whitaker. She was apparently very dedicated to neighborhood standards. I found her at the community clubhouse sitting like a queen upon a throne of self-granted plaques, a framed photograph labeled Visionary Leader hanging behind her. She was scolding a boy for installing a basketball hoop. When I entered, I cleared my throat and announced myself as the owner of 214 Pine Lane. Her eyes flicked up and she smirked a smug practice twist of the lips. Flipping through a folder, she said that lot was delinquent, unclaimed, and reassigned to the HOA per protocol. When I discussed my active duty status and federal exemption, she interrupted. Maybe you should have thought of your responsibilities prior to fleeing to be a soldier. The room was silent, her words hanging in the air like smoke. I referenced federal law shielding deployed service members from property loss. She dangled a lot by the trash compactor, cooing, "We can work something out, honey." As if she was throwing me scraps, I left her smirk seared into my mind that night. I spent in a motel looking up at the ceiling, my body home, but my mind still at war. This wasn't Afghanistan, was filthier. Fought on my own soil against neighbors I'd bled to protect by morning. I phoned Javier Morales, a buddy from my unit now working cyber ops for a federal agency. I'd saved his life in a firefight he owed me within hours. He dug up web of fabricated deeds dated back HOA minutes and land transactions connected to Susan's brother-in-law. The HOA had forged a paper trail stating my land was abandoned. Javier discovered emails where Susan boasted about selling that grunt's plot and keeping the neighborhood soldier free. One message joked, I'd salute and slink off if I ever returned. Anger seethed, not the explosive kind, but the kind that hones focus. A lawsuit would take years, and Susan had lawyers on speed dial. I needed something sharper, louder, undeniable. I recalled Colonel Marcus Reed, who instructed me to call if ever in need of assistance stateside, when I described how the HOA stole my home while I was deployed. His tone turned steel cold. Send me the coordinates and a list of their assets, quiet or loud. I picked loud. The plan solidified. I didn't want an apology or a check. I wanted the HOA to feel what it's like to have their world appended. Javier spent nights digging, building a dossier thick enough to choke a bureaucrat. He discovered records of the HOA asserting adverse possession, forging my signature, and selling my land to a shell company operated by Susan's relatives. Satellite images revealed illegal expansions, fences, sidewalks, even a clubhouse constructed on protected wetlands. Susan's emails ridiculed veterans as troublemakers and referred to my house as a shack. I pinned one to my motel wall next to a picture of my porch where Mom used to drink iced tea in her rock. Ing chair, I wondered if they'd burned it or dumped it either way. They'd taken something more than Lanth's stolen memory. Next, I met Judge Clara Hensley at the courthouse, a retired JAG officer. She knew my unit and hates civilian scams on soldiers. I explained Javier's evidence, forged documents, zoning violations, emails. She dubbed it a criminal masterpiece and warned that despite the proof, the HO's money and connections could stall a lawsuit for years. When I asked about federal seizure for investigation, her eyes gleamed if it's tied to public service abuse or security. She said, "It's possible." I left and called Colonel Reed. He proposed a military training exercise on disputed land, framed as urban conflict readiness. Within a day, he secured approval for Operation Homefront, a weekend-long out by the 212th Tactical Battalion. My neighborhood and the nearby HOA properties would be a simulation zone. It was legal, daring, and impeccable. Susan had no idea her next meeting would be crashed by Humvees. Javier and me charted all illegal HOA buildings, the dog park clubhouse, even Susan's favorite rose garden. Military planning mapped vehicle routes and landing zones. 3 days later, all was ready. I spent my final motel night looking at pictures of my house. Recalling Mom chuckling as we painted the shutters that land was my roots, and they attempted to rip it out. Now I was rewriting the story. At dawn, Willow Ridge awoke to diesel roars, Humies rolled past manicured lawns, soldiers staked tents in the dog park, and a black hawk buzzed the meditation garden. Residents gaped in pajamas clutching mucks. Susan stormed out in a satin robe holding a cup that read, "Cedar Grove's Finest." Her jaw dropped as engineers turned her clubhouse to a command center. She charged an officer brandishing her mug as a scepter, but he gave her a packet federal directives for land investigation and temporary occupation. Her face turned beet red as she screamed on sovereignty. No one cared. I pulled up in an unmarked SUV, eyeing her spot. "Me. You did this?" she hissed, storming over. I nodded. "That land you stole, it's mine again, inch by inch." She sputtered, claiming HOA privileges, but I inquired how she last measured her property lines. She stopped soldiers cordoned off the clubhouse pool and garden, all constructed on stolen or unapproved land. Susan attempted locking herself inside the clubhouse, but the county handed over keys. Her wine fridge turned into a cooler for MREs, her living room a map room. Residents panicked, some holding pizza box protest signs, others calling news vans. A couple attempted confronting the obstagality, but retreated off when presented with their own zoning violations. An elderly couple took me coffee, admitting they'd despised Susan's fines for years. They showed me pictures of my old house, willing to testify. I thanked them. Sensing the tide shift by noon, media descended upon Susan's press conference flopped as cameras caught military tape wrapped around her beloved sign. She ranted about government overreach but cracked when asked why a veteran's home was razed. Her meltdown broadcast by evening going went viral with hashtags such as Justice for SG Ramirez and Susan Sinks. Javier tracked 5 other fake land sales in the HOA, and Susan's brother-in-law encountered IRS investigations. A red flag was raised. Federal training ground limited access. Susan's kingdom was taken over, her petunias tread upon by boots. They also made Cedar Grove a fortress. Soldiers trained beyond shocked residents. Drones mapped the terrain, and Susan's kitchen accommodated briefings. Checkpoints guarded her allies within the command post. I checked documents with one of the DoD officers, acknowledging my rightful ownership in HOA's offenses. They knocked down my house without approvals paid using Susan's funds up front. Susan attempted mobilizing her board using a megaphone, but residents booed, and an officer stuck on her table a federal audit notification dissolving the HOA cheers. Followed reporters swarmed around her demanding clarification. She garbled legalese, but the picture was out. She was evil, I was the avenger. Javier made the knockout leaked video of Susan taunting soldiers, laughing over the destruction of my house and boasting of fraud that is untouchable. I sent it to the media with one sentence, "I'm..." At home it went viral, and calls were made for her arrest, and veterans rallied around the VA, denounced her, and civil rights organizations provided legal representation. Susan's supporters abandoned her brother-in-law was subpoenaed, and her contractor rats out 11 homes. Hers included, received notices of relocation. Residents scrambled some packing, others weeping. Susan's house was made a federal review hub, her documents revealing years of embezzlement and shredded grievances. At nightfall, I stood where my living room used to be. Soldiers had staked the site, clearing ground to rebuild. I thank them, their salutes heavy with common tales of Homerant deceptions. Judge Hensley dissolved the HOA permanently. Stripping Susan's title, she was finished her authority. Her legacy ash that evening, I slept peacefully, knowing justice was near. Weeks later, rebuilding commenced the VA, and donations financed it with the hope of rebuilding my house. Precisely, neighbors brought food contractors and apologies for the past silence. Susan escaped town. Her car filled with boxes, her name Ami Cedar Grove, healed children played freely, yards bloomed chaotically. A new civic organization emerged with a Ramirez clause defending soldiers. I hammered in the first nail into the porch frame where Mom's swing would be hung. The sound was creation, not destruction. They stole my home while I struggled for theirs, so I went back, reclaimed it, and took apart their world. One nail, one truth, one soldier at a